Surviving Generations of the Holocaust, based in Seattle, Washington, has taken on the project of videotaping eyewitness accounts of the Holocaust from those individuals who survived the Nazi reign of terror. Millions of people were annihilated just because they were Jewish. The goals of this project are, first, to educate the current and future generations about the Holocaust, with the hope that those who learn what happened will not allow it to happen again, never again to any group of people. Second, to refute false allegations by neo-Nazis and revisionist historians that the Holocaust never occurred. And third, to refute the commonly held notion that the Jewish people offered little, if any, resistance to the Nazis. The voices of the dead are silent. The voices of the survivors must live on forever. My name is Lynn Chapman. Today I'm interviewing Gary L. Wells, a Holocaust survivor. He was born in Vienna, Austria. Mr. Wells, could you please tell me, what was your name when you were?
My name was Leopold Weisberg.
Can you tell me about your family at that time?
I was one of three boys. My parents were from Poland originally, and during the First World War moved to Vienna, Austria, when the Russian Cossacks were overrunning Polish villages, and they lived in a Polish village which was part of Austria-Hungary, and they just moved to the capital of Austria-Hungary, which was Vienna at the time.
What were your parents' names?
My father's name was David. My mother's name was Pesha.
And tell me about your siblings.
I had an older brother, Eddie, who was about 7 years older than I was, and a younger brother who was 2 years younger than I, Otto.
And tell me what your father and mother did for a living.
My father was an accountant, and my mother was a housewife.
Can you tell me about the level of religious observance in your household?
We were not religious. We observed the very high holidays, and I went through a Jewish kindergarten when I was very young, but my parents didn't observe the kosher rituals and so forth. But on the other hand, we were very much Jewish in the sense that the surrounding environment that we lived in was very hostile towards Jews. And therefore, we were, of necessity, thrown into the same crowd all the time, which meant that we were socializing with Jewish people all the time. My parents would go to the park and have one or two benches in which they would always sit with other Jewish people. And I would always play with other Jewish boys and girls.
How many Jews were living in Vienna at that time?
I think the total Jewish population of Austria was somewhere around 300,000. And most of them were living in Vienna, Austria.
Okay. And can you tell me some activities that you participated in, say some leisure activities, with your family or with other people in the community?
Well, I belonged to a Zionist group. It was a labor Zionist group which was preparing the people to immigrate to what was then called Palestine. And we used to meet once a week, and we used to go on hikes. And we also had summer camps that we went to. In fact, one of the interesting things that occurred to show you the level of anti-Semitism that existed in Austria at the time, we were once on a summer camp in the country, in Austrian countryside, and we used to have a large flagpole, and we used to stand guards at night, preparing for the time that we might be living in a kibbutz in Israel. And the Nazis in the surrounding area would come and pin threatening notices on the flagpole, and they wanted us to leave, you see, to pack up and go back to Vienna. And when we went and complained to the local police, they told us they couldn't help protect us. And as a result, after a few days, we packed up and went back to Vienna. It was a very hostile kind of environment, even before Hitler came.
Was your family politically involved at all besides yourself? And if so, could you tell me a little bit about it?
Yes, my father was a social democrat for most of his adult life. And my older brother, Eddie, also belonged to the socialist student movement, whereas I myself and my younger brother, Otto, were more inclined towards the Zionists.
Was the social democratic movement, can you tell me, was that the majority movement at the time, or tell me how that fit into the Austrian society at that time?
Up to the year 1933, Vienna was a socialist city. The majority of the people were voting socialist. The mayor was a socialist. The whole city government was socialistic. In fact, during that time, a lot of municipal apartment buildings were built for the population by the Viennese city government. But in 1933, there was an uprising, and the fascist rightist movement took over and declared the socialists and the Nazis illegal. And then we just had a kind of a dictatorship, which was much influenced by the Catholic Church in Austria, because the Catholic Church was the strongest party in Austria at the time.
Why did that happen? I mean, did it have any relation at all to what was going on in Germany?
It probably did, because on the one hand, we were going closer to the right, but yet they wanted to keep it still a separate Austrian country. So I think it must have had something to do with the pressure coming from Germany. Yes.
Okay.
No, not yet.
We're getting to that. Go ahead. You mentioned to me that you went to Jewish kindergarten. Can you tell me a little bit more about the other education that you received after that?
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, because when I first went to elementary school after Jewish kindergarten, which was a public school, we had 6 days a week lessons. And I had a boyfriend, a young kid, who was from a very Orthodox family in my class. And on Saturday, when we had school, he was required to write. And he refused. He claimed that he couldn't. His religion wouldn't allow him to do it. And the teacher got very indignant and called him all kinds of names and screamed and yelled, you know, and made it very, very uncomfortable. It was you can imagine I was 6 years old then, and there was no way either. I felt that the attack on him was more or less an attack on me as well, even though I was willing to write on Saturday. And when I came home and told my parents about it, there's nothing, they felt they were helpless about the situation. There was absolutely nothing they could do. Whereas my friend's family insisted that he wasn't going to write on Saturday, you see.
How did some of the other people react in the classroom?
Well, actually, I think there wasn't very much, we didn't get any sympathy, if that's what you think, from any of the other children.
What was your relationship like with some of the other non-Jews that were in your community or in your classroom?
We really had very, very little social interchange, hardly any. It just was a matter of course that we, in order to preserve whatever it was that we, the security, would stick together, you know, and socialize together, help each other on homework and so forth, you see.
Can you tell me a little bit about some other anti-Semitic acts that you remember that occurred before the war or closer to that time period in your life? If you could just think of a few things, a few incidents that you remember.
Well, I think that basically this would lead us into talking about my brother, who was involved with a married woman. She was a mother of 2 small daughters, and he had an affair with her, and somehow or other she became pregnant, and in Catholic Austria, it was very, very difficult to get an abortion. But they finally managed to get an abortion for her, and the husband eventually found out about the entire affair, and it came to court, and the woman who had performed the abortion got a jail sentence. My brother got off with a suspended sentence, and it was a very, very nasty thing, because it brought in a lot of underlying anti-Semitism. She was non-Jewish, you see.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the effects all of this had on your family?
Well, my family was very upset over it, because we felt we'd kept to ourselves. And it was my brother who always tended to be more with the Gentile crowd. He was blonde and blue-eyed, and he could pass for a Gentile. And he was always involved with the socialist student movement, which was almost all totally non-Jewish.
What was the time period that this started happening?
Most of that took place around, starting around 1933, all the way into 1938, just before the time that the Hitler, was preparing to move in. You see, there was in '38, in February 1938, Hitler demanded that the Austrian Chancellor come up to Germany for a talk with him. And from what we learned later, he really had him on the carpet and screamed and yelled at him and treated him like a schoolboy, and demanded that he bring into his government a Nazi Minister of Interior. And when Schuschnigg came back from Germany, he had agreed to this.
Is Schuschnigg
was the Chancellor of Austria.
I see.
And this Nazi Interior Minister then was in charge of the police and in charge of lots of other activity in Austria. One of the results of this was that the Austrian Nazis, who had up till that time been an illegal party, all of a sudden started to act more or less in a legal manner. You could see uniforms appearing, swastikas appearing on people's arms, and the first Nazi newspaper was at that point published. And what happened was that either the first or second issue of that paper had on the front page an article about my brother being a student, a Jewish student, who had defamed this Aryan mother of 2 children, and it caused an enormous uproar in the population in general. But we didn't see that. We hadn't seen the paper. We didn't know that this had appeared. And my brother, who was a student at the veterinary college in Vienna, went as usual to the school that morning, and he was beaten up by the students. When he came home, and we wanted to make a complaint to the police about this, the school made a counter-complaint that he had caused disturbance in the school. As a result of that, there was a court case that was instituted. A date was set for this, and he had to defend himself against allegations that he had started a commotion in the school. We had to get a lawyer to defend him, and when we asked some of our Jewish friends who were lawyers to go and look into the matter, when they went to the court and read the papers, they were told by the clerks in the court that this was a very touchy situation, and that if they didn't want to get involved, they ought to stay away from it because it could be explosive. So as a result of that, we could not find any representation for him. And we could see that the Nazis were trying to build this up into a big case to arouse the public. Hitler hadn't yet moved in, and they knew it needed some kind of excuses to do it. And we spoke to the Jewish committee in Vienna and pointed this out to them, and they agreed that this was a very, very serious matter, and they had to try and see that it was postponed. You see, at that time, we were just before a plebiscite when the Chancellor came back from Germany. At one point, he announced that he was going to have a public plebiscite among the Austrians.
What is a plebiscite?
They were going to decide on a yes or no vote, a vote for Hitler or a vote for the present regime. You see, and
what was the date then?
that was scheduled for March 13th.
In what year?
That's in 1938.
Okay.
And this whole thing took place just around that time. We finally got the Jewish committee to agree that they had to intervene in some fashion, and what they did is they had my brother put into a private mental institution and declared him unfit to stand trial at this time, which automatically postponed the trial taking place. But then, while he was confined in this institution, in the very last minutes, 3 days before the plebiscite was to take place, the Chancellor simply called it off. He must have gotten so much pressure from Germany that he just called it off. It was just 3 days before, and it almost looked like we would have won, you know, that Hitler may have lost out on this. So he must have put enormous pressure on Austrians, and they called off the plebiscite. Well, we felt that day we must get my brother out of Austria, that we didn't know what was going to happen next, you know. So we managed to get him out of the institution at night. We put him on a train and sent him out to Czechoslovakia. We had relatives there, and we telephoned them, and they were expecting him. So he left I think on the 9th or 10th of March. Then, just after the Chancellor had called off the plebiscite, a day or two later, the Nazis started marching in.
And what was that date?
That was on March 11th. March 11th and March 12th, they marched in. And managed to get him out of the institution at night. We put him on a train and sent him out to Czechoslovakia. We had relatives there, and we telephoned them, and they were expecting him. So he left I think on the 9th or 10th of March. Then, just after the Chancellor had called off the plebiscite, a day or two later, the Nazis started marching in.
And what was that date?
That was on March 11th. March 11th and March 12th, they marched in. And to everybody's surprise, the population was all jubilant and up in arms and greeting them like saviors, you know. And the whole town was just having a wonderful time. Hitler came on a Monday, the 14th of March, and there were hundreds of thousands of people out there. They just screamed to see him, you know. He had to come out on the balcony every 5 minutes and give his salute and whatnot. And all of a sudden, there were more Nazis than I'd ever seen anywhere, you know. They were all in hiding before, and all of a sudden, everybody was a sympathizer, and everybody believed in Hitler, you see. The worst part was that the populace got very, started to get very aggressive against the Jews. They started plundering stores. They broke into Jewish stores. They grabbed people that looked Jewish off the street. And at that time, there were a lot of slogans on walls in preparation of this plebiscite. So there were a lot of people, you know, there were a lot of slogans for the Austrian regime and against the Nazis, where had been painted on all kinds of walls. And what the Nazis did, they rounded up Jews, gave them brushes and buckets, and sometimes they gave them only a toothbrushes, and watched them while they had to scrub off these slogans, you see. I was 17 years old then, and I was watching some of this on the street. My parents didn't want me to be out there, you know. They felt that I was safer at home because you never could tell who they were going to pick up and what they were going to do to you. You could just disappear, and they were, you know, they picked you up in a truck and drove you off to a concentration camp, and that was the end of you. But one of those times when I was away, the local Nazis came to our house and were looking for my brother. They were obviously wanting to pick him up. And when my parents told them that he had left the country, they first didn't believe it, and they were very indignant, very angry. And my parents realized that had I been home, because they were so angry, they probably would have picked me up just so they could take somebody with them. So basically what we realized, that there was no safety within your house, and there certainly was no safety on the street, you know?
Were you still living, was your family still living in your same home at that time?
Yes, at that time they were still living in this, we had a municipal apartment in one of those municipal buildings, and we were still living there, yes. So basically, you could tell, once you saw when you walked on the street, that the policemen that you had seen before were now having swastika armbands. You knew that there's no way you could ask for protection from them, and no way were they going to do anything for you. In fact, we saw many of them standing, watching all these, you know, assaults on Jews taking place, and laughing and joking about it. You see, one of the things that somebody at the time said is that the Germans are very good Nazis, but lousy anti-Semites. But the Austrians are very good anti-Semites, but very lousy Nazis.
Do you know who said that?
I don't remember who it was, but it was quoted on and off. And it's absolutely true, because you see, afterwards, many of the famous Nazis that had a lot to do with the persecution of the Jews, like Eichmann, for instance, and many others, they were all Austrians, you see. They were all Austrians. And apparently this was kind of ingrained in them.
So what happened to your family next? What was the next phase?
Well, first of all, my parents felt very unsure about my safety, because they thought somehow or other they were going to pick me up. The Nazis were watching our house because they still felt that my brother was going to show up. So they had me live with my uncle and aunt in a different part of the town and kind of stay in hiding there. But they also realized that this was not going to be a solution forever. And we started to look around and see where I could go and what I could do, which is, wasn't very unusual, because I wasn't the only one that was looking to get out of Austria. The fact of the matter is that only a few weeks after Hitler marched in, almost all the countries surrounding Austria declared that they will not accept any refugees, any Jewish refugees coming into their territory, you see. So it was very difficult to get a visa, if you were a Jew, to go maybe to Paris, to France, or go to Switzerland, go to Italy, or any of these places. So most of us felt that the only way we could get out and get into one of these countries was by illegal means, that is, crossing a border without being seen. So the first try that I made was somewhere around July or so. Myself and a school friend of mine, we had heard from somebody that there was a smuggler in Saarbrücken, which is up in northern Germany, and that he used to do smuggling of goods across the border from Germany to France, or back, vice versa. And all we had is his name and address. We never knew him. We didn't know anyone that did. So the two of us got on the train, and we traveled all through Germany, up north to Saarbrücken. And the interesting thing was that with all this upheaval that was going on in Austria, where Jews were really in fear of their lives, in Germany, conditions were, at that point, very calm. You know, it was orderly. There were no, the mobs weren't ruling the streets like they did in Vienna.
Did that surprise you?
Yes, it surprised me a lot. Yes. So when we got to Saarbrücken, and we knocked on this poor man's door, he was very shocked. I mean, he was very suspicious of us. He didn't know who had sent us. He thought maybe it was a trap, you know. After all, it was Germany, and it was a Nazi Germany that he lived in, so he didn't want to have anything to do with us. So we went to the Jewish committee in Saarbrücken. We figured that was our last hope, and we were going to find out maybe they can steer us to somebody. And the interesting thing was, they told us that at that time, the Gestapo in Saarbrücken was actively helping Jews across the French border. That sounds really unusual. But at that time in the Nazi history, they were still trying to get rid of Jews by having them leave the country rather than the final solution, which came later. So we went up to the border post and told the Gestapo there that we wanted to get across. I had a valid passport. My friend didn't have a passport at all. So it was out of the question that he was going to leave. He had to go back. They weren't going to do anything for him. But in my case, they said yes, they would see that they get me across the border. But first, they had to search me. And what they were looking for, basically, was valuables, you know, like diamonds and gold and things like that that you might be taking out of the country, which you were not permitted to do. In fact, all you were permitted to take out was 10 Reichsmark, 10 German marks, which amounted to next to nothing. And you were not allowed to have any foreign currency. Well, before I left Vienna, my parents thought that they had to see that I had, at least for the first few days, some kind of money to get along with. So my mother had about 3 or 4 or 5 pounds, British pounds, that she sewed into the back of my tie. And I wore that tie. And when this Gestapo man said he wants to search me, he really meant it. I mean, he wanted me to get totally undressed. And he took my shoes and started ripping up the soles, opening the soles. And he went through the little bit of luggage I had with me. And finally, all I had on was the shirt, and I had the tie hanging loose on me, and I had the shirt open. And I said, well, do you want me to take off my shirt? And he says, no, that's all right. It's okay.
How were you feeling during that time?
I was so scared. I can't tell you how scared I was, because I knew that if they found these lousy 5 pounds, which were probably next to nothing, worth next to nothing, I would have wound up in a concentration camp, and I would have been dead. I mean, I would not be here to tell you the story, you see. So when I finally was dressed, he told me to follow him, and the tragic comedy in this whole thing is, he took me through the Jewish cemetery in Saarbrücken. We walked right through the Jewish cemetery, and he went to the end, to the wall there, and he said, across the wall on this cemetery is France, you see. And he says, I'll help you climb across, you see, because I couldn't, it was too high up, and he couldn't climb it by myself. He had to help me, push me up. And he did one nice thing for me, because he said, if they should catch you, I don't want you to tell them that we helped you across, because otherwise we'll never be able to help anybody else. But if they catch you and they send you back, here's my name, and just remember it, so that if you were sent back, mention my name. Now, this first brought into cognizance to me the fact that I could get caught, you know, that it wasn't a sure thing that just because I climbed across the wall, I was safe, you see. So when I did get across the wall, I was heading towards Metz, which was the largest French city in the area, but it was quite a ways away. And since I didn't have any French money, it meant walking. And I expected that if I got to Metz, I was going to find the rabbi in Metz and then see whether he was going to help me. Well, I didn't get terribly far. And I was walking on this country road, and I looked peculiar anyway, because I didn't look like a French a peasant boy. I looked like a schoolboy from Vienna, you know, with a satchel on my back. And so I saw from far away a French policeman coming towards me with his cape and all that, and I knew I had no chance. I was walking right into his arms. Well, he asked me whether I had a passport and how come I don't have a visa and so forth. And he took me to the police station, and they interrogated me for quite a while, and they kept calling Paris for instructions of what to do. And since I didn't want to tell them where I came across, I don't think they liked that terribly much, you see. So the upshot was they stamped my passport that I was ejected from France, that if I came back there again, I would be put in prison. And they put me on a train, an express train, from France to Germany. The train didn't stop anywhere between those two stations. And while I was on there, I debated with myself whether I should jump. You know, the train was going very fast. I didn't know if I jumped, I'm liable to run into this same policeman all over again, you know. And so I went back to Saarbrücken, and no sooner when I got through the passport control with my passport, they called me over and said, Gestapo, we want to see you. Because the passports that we had were only good for a one-way journey, namely out. But it wasn't a passport that allowed you to come back, you see. So luckily I had the name of this Gestapo man.
Do you still remember his name?
No, I don't. But he saved my life, because when they heard that, you know, I mentioned his name, they took me upstairs to one of their rooms, and they went through the same routine all over again, because now they thought this guy may be smuggling stuff from France into Germany, you see. So they had me get undressed all over again. They went through the same search, and I did exactly the same thing I did before, namely I got totally undressed except for my shirt and tie, and I opened it up and I said, no, any further? And they said, no, okay. So they let me go, and I took the train all the way back, all over again, to Vienna, and my parents were very upset when they saw me, because they expected that I had gotten out, you see.
What were you thinking and feeling at that time?
Well, I was, you see, I was very young, and a lot of this was, a lot of it was kind of an adventurous activity yet. And also, we really didn't know how serious the Nazis were at that time. You know, in other words, how serious the game was. That you know, anybody that loses, really loses his life. You know, it was a deadly game. You see, so I knew that I couldn't stay. So as soon as I came back, my parents at that point had been evicted from the apartment because it was a municipal apartment, and they couldn't find another apartment, and my aunt and grandmother had a little candy store which was doing terribly, and so they closed the candy store, and they took my mother and father and my brother into this store, put up some beds, and this is where they were living. You know, where they closed the shutters on the front, and it was a terrible existence there. Everybody was packed in tight. There were no windows. There was nothing, and I really felt like I wanted to leave as soon as I could.
How big of a place was it?
Well, it was only a one-bedroom apartment, and this candy store, which was just one little room. It was a terrible existence because most of our furniture we had to give up. You know, all my belongings had gone, because books and things like that were all gone because they had no space for it. You know, we came out of a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment, and so nothing was the same at all anymore. You see. So that I was very much, I was really wanting to get out as soon as I could. Now I made another attempt, this time with a different friend. And again, we had heard of some Austrian smuggler who for money would take us across the Austrian-Swiss border. So we took the train to this little town on the Austrian border, and we had to meet the smuggler in one of the sort of a restaurant and inn. And when we got there, there was already another Jewish couple, a young couple, with a baby on their arms, who were also waiting for the smuggler. And he told us when he came, first he collected his fee, which was considerable, and then he told us that he was gonna pick us up the next morning and take us across. So by the next morning, what he actually had done was he had paid off some Swiss border guards, and he took us to an Austrian swimming pool, which was also being used by Swiss sometimes. And the Swiss used to drive across the border and go to the swimming pool. And what they did is he just called for Swiss taxis to come and pick us up. And then they just drove us across the border, and the border guards saluted the taxis, and we were in Switzerland. The only problem was that we were now right smack on the Swiss border. And we knew from experience that if you were caught on the border, you were immediately shipped across. That if you got in the interior of the country, you stood a better chance of surviving than if you were caught on the border. So the lucky thing was that this couple with the baby had made arrangements with someone in Switzerland to wait for them on the Swiss side of the border.